Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm L Shawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching.
So we are starting in the ACT section of our guided journal, Coaching Nuggets of Wisdom to Inspire, Explore, Act, Flourish, a guided journal to live your best life. We just wrapped up the previous section on explore, and really inspire and explore were the first two sections that helped frame a deeper understanding of oneself in the context of internal systems and what's going on, as well as external factors as well. And so now we're getting to this space in the journal where it is time to take action. And for some, that can feel heavy or challenging or not very aligned. And for others, they're like, hey, I was already here. I'm already taking action, and everything in between. Action in itself and how we relate to it seems to bring up a lot of feelings for a lot of people. So this section is ACT, take intentional action. And I'm going to read the first prompt, and that's the one we're going to explore together here today. And this prompt says, use feedback to inform your curiosity and enhance your way of living. Think of feedback like a mirror. It reflects things you may not see on your own, helping you become more self-aware and intentional in how you move through life. Recall a moment when someone offered you feedback that stirred something within. Instead of judging it, breathe into it. What wisdom might it hold for your journey? How can staying open and curious help you evolve into a more aligned, vibrant version of yourself? Let your heart lead this reflection. So this is a really good jumping off springboard prompt for action, because feedback is often one of the requirements for us to take action. We're constantly getting different inputs of feedback from the environment, from humans, from ourselves, those sorts of things. And so this is a way for us to explore that with generosity for ourselves and of course for others, and then also for what that can mean for us to move forward with an important aspect in our life, whether we are contemplating something regarding a life transition, a small goal or a big goal, a career shift. There's so many things that feedback can help inform to help you stay focused on your action and move forward in a meaningful way. So L Shawn, with this question here, when someone offered you feedback, recall that moment and it stirred something within, instead of judging it, breathe into it. Have you had that experience where someone's offered you feedback and maybe at first it felt a little scary, or you didn't listen as much as you realized you wanted and needed to, but then moved into this phase of breathing into the feedback and using it for your, action and next steps?
Often when I get feedback from others, I get a perspective of myself that I don't hold in my own mind. Often when I'm in a situation or I'm doing something, I overcritical. I think that I tend to hold myself at really high, almost unreasonable standards of like perfection. Perfectionism is part of things that I, struggle with, just trying to do it right and making the right decision and making everyone happy. That's a people pleaser in me. And often when I get feedback from other people about the way I handle the situation, or if I share what I'm doing and then they give me feedback on their thoughts about what I'm doing, I often get feedback that surprises me. Like, for example, I remember vividly this one thing that happened, and I was being critical of myself, thinking that I had jumped to conclusions. And I was talking to my cousins, actually, and one of my cousins who I'm not particularly close to, and it had been several years since I had seen this cousin, and I was talking to them about kind of my self-doubt about a situation, and my cousin said something. He gave me feedback. He said that he had never known me to make a decision rashly, that I'm always look at the pros and cons, that I think very carefully before I act. And his feedback to me was more, it was a way for me to see myself outside of my, my self-critical lens, and to see someone who I didn't even know was even paying attention to me, that was even like observing me on that level. But to get that feedback, it helped give me a sense of balance about the situation. And I was second guessing myself. And then I took a moment to think about what my cousin had said to me, the feedback that he had given me. And I reassessed, how did I come to this conclusion? And then I realized, after I kind of stepped away from the result of this conclusion, I got to it in very much the same way that my cousin reflected to me, that he observed in me, that I was careful, that I looked at all sides, that I didn't come to this conclusion rashly, and that the decision to act and the decision that I made was reasonable, and it was proportionate to the situation at hand. And having gotten that feedback, I felt a lot better about the process that I take in my decisions. And often when I get feedback from people, whether, feedback of things I can improve on, or things that they observed in me that I don't see in myself, really does help to solidify and to strengthen my resolve. That's my experience with feedback. And I mean, when it comes to feedback, I actually rely on that, especially when I'm making a decision that I think is going to affect several people. And I really value feedback because it gives me another perspective, and it allows me to have a more balanced view of a situation. How about you, Eryn? Where have you had feedback, when someone offered you feedback that stirred something within? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think one of the most disruptive points of getting feedback that was actually really helpful was when a colleague once told me I cared too much about my career. And I had to sit with that for a while because I tend to be overachieving in a lot of ways. And that feedback, although it burnt, it stung, it didn't feel great. It really helped me reflect on my relationship to feedback throughout my life, right? Like graduating summa cum laude and always getting straight A's and always wanting that type of feedback. And if I didn't get the A, it was like this complete failure, rather than information, right? Rather than information that could help me move forward in a more meaningful and authentic way, versus just trying to get the best I can to make sure that I was doing my best. And when I listened to that feedback and I took it in, I had a tinge of guilt, a tinge of sadness, a tinge of hopefulness. I was like, okay, I have sought this kind of level of perfectionism and this level of feedback throughout my life, and it hasn't been the most helpful. It's been helpful in certain ways, right? Like, to me, I still think it's a good thing to try my best, but not to a level of where it impinges on my well-being, other people's well-being, that sort of thing. And that feedback that I received in this moment really helped me gain more perspective, than to gain more skills on how I could be sure to live a more balanced life and get that feedback for my own well-being, as well as live, more purposely outside of my work as well. So that one instance really stands out to me as a very meaningful time I have gotten feedback. And it's always interesting. It's always like, our podcast is all about coaching nuggets of wisdom. It's like I'll get these little nuggets at different points in my life, and they kind of like lay a trail. And then I can look back on a theme and say, oh, okay, this is what people have been trying to tell me for quite some time. It just took me 10 years, right, to kind of really lean into this and listen. And so this all goes back to, right, that listening piece, which we've talked about in other parts of this journal. And the listening piece is what we've been preparing ourselves in this journal in the first two sections for, to embody feedback. And this section is all about taking it into meaningful action. So getting that feedback about my career, I actually ended up, it was one of the starting points where I ended up completely shifting my career and moving out of the world of work that I was doing and into something that felt more aligned and purposeful and fit into the lifestyle that I wanted to live. And so sometimes feedback comes with a little bit of a sting or it can't feel great, but it can then lead to something much, much better. And this feedback was delivered with care. It wasn't in a setting of like, trying to be malicious or just out of meanness. It was truly out of care. And I think that's the other thing. When we receive feedback or if we give feedback, there needs to be that care involved, because I think there can be sometimes, it can sometimes not be in that caring lens, which then can create people will shut down or, right. I mean, how many times in the workplace when you're doing reviews of employees or whatever, like people feel nervous about that, or they get anxious or they're frustrated. I don't want to be judged, or it all comes down to like, it's hard to be vulnerable because not only is the feedback scary sometimes to hear, it may not be aligned with what we think, right? And so then how do we navigate that and how do we move with that? So feedback, like anything, has so many layers, but for me, it really was that one point in my career where I had to sit with that and go, okay. And I think one other point of feedback, and I think I brought this up in another part of this journal, but when professor told me when my daughter passed, you cannot think your way out of this. Like that line just really stuck with me and continues to stick with me and informs a lot of my life.
It's interesting how feedback comes in so many from different channels and different shapes. And even looking back at feedback that we received in the past and how we look at it in a different phase in our lives. And I love how you said like the different like nuggets of wisdom that you have. It's kind of a trail of evidence of growth or patterns that you have, and knowing that there's like a common theme throughout like the different instances of observations and feedback that you get throughout your life, and how that comment that you got about caring too much about your career led to a pivot and led to realigning yourself with work that was more fulfilling and more meaningful. So I liked hearing about or where feedback led you and where feedback can lead us. And I one thing that came to mind was the first part of the prompt, which was use feedback as a way to inform your curiosity and enhance your way of living. And I wanted to look at that too, in terms of if we were to use it as a way to inform our curiosity and enhance our way of living, how would that look, in terms of even getting feedback that stung, like in terms of you caring too much about your career, like what does that mean? I mean, there's one way that you could have responded to that defensively, you know, but instead you took it as a way to re-examine, where you were going and what you were aligning yourself with, and how you were showing up in your career, and how that was affecting you. And I also think about the feedback that I receive as well, and how I could use that to inform my curiosity. And so one thing that I'm thinking about is if, for example, we get feedback from someone that we might see as criticism or judgment, how can we transform that into like shining a light on a blind spot, or maybe even countering that, like maybe even having like a playful, light-hearted, playing the devil's advocate or something like that, where we can learn more about how people see us, how we see ourselves, and maybe meet somewhere in the middle. Because there's something about those two suggestions, I would say, informing your curiosity and enhance your way of living. So then if we look at feedback as a way to enhance our way of living, I go back to what you did, Eryn, when you got that feedback about caring too much about your career and how that stirred something in you and it disrupted something in you that gave you the opportunity to imagine something else, or to imagine a different way of being. That to me is really profound too, just to take that one, because we get lots of feedback from not just verbal feedback, intentional feedback, but just feedback from that's not like unintentional or just people responding to us. Like, for example, a, a way that someone might respond or how their body language is a form of feedback as well. Are they closed? Are they open? Are they aggressive? Are they standoffish? And that is a way for us to inform our curiosity. So you could get curious about what it might be. It could be you, it could be something totally different, something not you, but just to get curious about the things that are happening around us and the source of those things. And sometimes it's completely unrelated to ourselves. It could be something that they're bringing into the situation that we're not aware of. Often when people have what we might think is a disproportionate reaction to something we do or say or something that happens, it's often them reacting to something in the past that's similar, that is causing them to recall a feeling that they had in a past trauma or something like that. And we often do respond to shadows and not to actual what's happening in the present. And this can come back to ourselves as well. Like, for example, if we are in a situation where the people around us might be giving us feedback like, wow, that's a big reaction to this. It seems like it's not as big as it should be. Then that's a way for us to kind of pause and think, okay, am I responding to what's happening now, or is this reminding me of something that happened to me when I felt powerless or when I was a child? And so it's ways for us to kind of dig deeper. And it kind of echoes back to the previous sections, inspire and explore, especially explore, where we're looking at our way of being. And at this point, when we are looking at feedback, when we're looking at how this can inform our curiosity and enhance our way of living, this could bring back questions of values. For example, if someone might be giving us feedback and it doesn't resonate or it's discordant, we might want to use that to inform our curiosity about what is it about this person's comment or whatever their response to my actions or my words that is discordant or doesn't resonate, that's chafing. Could it be that there's some values conflict here? Maybe we have different values, and then we can lean into that curiosity and maybe even ask the question. For example, you could say, oh, I understand. I see this upset you. Can you tell me more about what's going on with you? And that could open up a conversation, and that can open up a way to strengthen bonds, deepen understanding, and learn about other people in a situation. So those are some things that are coming up for me regarding informing curiosity and enhancing our way of living. Although I've been more leaning towards curiosity and not so much enhancing our way of living. But what's coming up for you, Eryn?
Well, I like how you did explore that, and especially with the curiosity piece. When you earlier said imagine, like when you get feedback, just open yourself up to imagining all the possibilities from that. I think it takes some pressure off of getting feedback that might sometimes feel really critical. And I think that that's a really helpful tool in the toolbox. And then when you were talking about all the different avenues of exploring feedback, it reminded me a lot of just being in a coaching session and how we can be open to that, right? And what that looks like from both places. So from the coach themselves being curious about feedback we may deliver to our own clients, and then the clients having that same curiosity. That reciprocity, I think, is so important in the coaching relationship, but it really is broken down here by what you talked about. And it really made me think of like, okay, this is what this could look like from the coach's perspective as they explore feedback with a client. And I think feedback as a topic in itself with a coaching client can be a really helpful coaching conversation and coaching session. What is your relationship to feedback? Describe feedback you've gotten throughout your life. What did it say? What were common themes? What have you missed about feedback that now that we're talking about it, you're now realizing has been important? Asking all those types of coaching questions with that feedback, I think, can be really helpful. So that really resonated with me on the curiosity end. And then your comment on that we often respond to shadows. That part is so true. It's like, no matter what, we can be the most resourced, have had the most therapy, whatever it may be, there's still that tinge often when we talk about feedback, even if it's not about receiving it, giving it, right? Sometimes giving feedback is just as difficult, if not more, than receiving it. And when the feedback is given in a way that doesn't feel authentic, I think that is so hard to receive. And I know we try to train sometimes employees in corporate America and education to give certain ways of giving feedback, which it's important to have that kind of structure. On the other hand, it can lead to this level of not feeling authentic and just feeling like they're just doing this to check boxes, and I don't want to be a part of this conversation. So that's a little bit of an aside. So I want to get back to the other part of that prompt, other part of the first sentence of this prompt where it says, enhance your way of living, like you were alluding to there. And so how does feedback enhance our way of living? And I think that's where we take it into a phase of action. And feedback, even just like through our senses, right? What we see, taste, smell, touch, hear, feel within, all of those sorts of things, those are giving us feedback consistently. And I think it's a good coaching exercise to take a moment to pause with those senses, see what feedback is happening, and if there are any small, simple, mindful shifts to make. Because either way, we'll probably just go about our day, right? Not thinking about those things because there's so many other tasks and commitments and other things to think about. But what does that look like when we can kind of sit with our senses and say, okay, I thought even at the most basic level, I used to like the smell of lavender more, but now I like the smell of coconut more. Like, why am I still using lavender scents if I don't like it, like as much? And those types of things, I think, enhance our way of living. And they can be really small and really easy to adjust and require very little effort. On the other end of that, the bigger pieces that enhance our way of living, this is where I think coaching support, counseling support can really be helpful when we are making those bigger shifts in our lives. And in doing so from an informed way. And yes, you'll get that feedback through coaching and counseling in different ways. And that can be one of the ways to enhance our way of living. But there's so many other ways too that maybe aren't through professional routes, whether that is through journaling, through talking aloud, even in our own homes and just processing things, and then sitting with friends or partners and just asking for, I really want honest feedback about this. What have you noticed? And this is something, as I've had to manage a chronic mental health condition, it's something I've had to do quite regularly in my relationship with my partner, because it's like, okay, I'm noticing this. Please give me feedback. What are you seeing? And then that helps with my regulation and what I need too. So not only are these tools that are needed to enhance our way of living, sometimes they're tools for those of us who have these chronic conditions that can really be a lifeline, right? Like they really help provide important moments of feedback that can be really helpful. So those are some of the kind of top of mind ways that people can use feedback to enhance their way of living. Well, Shawn, what ideas do you have?
Well, I like the piece about what you said about getting feedback from your partner. It also made me think about the second sentence in the prompt, which is think of feedback like a mirror. It reflects things you may not see on your own, helping you become more self-aware and intentional in how you move through life. And so that part, that the piece that you said about needing that feedback from your partner about, things that are showing up and getting that feedback, having a bigger picture of what's going on, and then also the reflection that feedback can, that role of feedback that can play in our lives. And I really started thinking about that too. And also that's is a skill. It sounds like a skill, from what you were saying, Eryn, where you would even be self-aware enough to make that call. And it does sound like, and you mentioned working with professionals, coaches, and therapists, and how that is a skill that one needs to work on and acquire in order to use it in such a way that they can enhance their way of life and they can understand how certain things are showing up for them, and how the people who are around them the most, like in your case, Eryn, your partner, be able to share where there's some shifts there. This reminds me of something that my partner and I also do with feedback is he suffers from migraines. And what happens with migraines is you often don't know you're in a migraine until it's like too late and you're like in a lot of pain. And one of the things that we would do is I would monitor certain behaviors that he had. Like he would get kind of slow in his response, and that was a sign of migraine. And also his eyes would turn gray. So his eyes are normally blue, but we noticed that whenever he, like the aura of the migraine, like before the pain sets in, his eyes would turn gray. And so that's something that he wouldn't see unless he was in front of a mirror. This comes back to the whole reflecting things you cannot see. And I would say, your eyes are turning gray, you should take your migraine medicine. And that was a way for me as a person giving feedback and monitoring. And that's another thing that I'm glad you brought this up as well, Eryn, because it helps the practitioners as well to get the feedback from the parents and the spouse, and the partners in the relationship, because there are things that we're not necessarily aware of, but that our partners can see. Oh, you're short-tempered, or you seem a little disconnected. Someone can actually check in with you. Good friends can check in and call in. Those are ways that we can serve as mirrors to each other, where we can gently, lovingly share what we're seeing with our loved ones. And so there's a lot there that's coming up in terms of the using feedback as a tool to reflect what you see. And one of the things that we learn in coaching is giving an observation, looking at only the observable things. We're not interpreting what we see, we're sharing what we see. So for example, if I'm in a coaching conversation with a client and I notice that the volume of their voices is increasing, and I could say, oh, I noticed that your volume increased like a couple notches when you were talking about that. Can you tell me what was going on for you there? So it's not, oh, I noticed that you were upset, or I like those things like that can be kind of interpreting what you see rather than sharing what you see, rather than putting
Yeah.
meaning on that. And I think that's a skill too. That's a
Yeah,
skill too.
that is definitely a skill. And that being objective is what really resonated with me there, and what makes feedback both so helpful and hard, because it needs to be objective with care. And those two
Yes.
kind of can clash. It feels like the hard with the soft in some ways sometimes, right? And the way you
Yeah.
just described how you would do that is a great example of of how to give feedback in those cases. So I really appreciate that. I'm still kind of stuck a little bit on how this prompt further ties to taking action. And I think taking action is so hard because there has to be a level of space, a level of commitment, a level of want, a level of challenge, a level of ease. Like there's so much that makes taking action on things so challenging. And feedback is one component that helps with taking action. But yeah, I don't know. I'm still kind of like spinning my wheels here. Like, how else would feedback lead to action? So we've talked about it in terms of feedback as a skill, feedback as something we receive, feedback as something we deliver, feedback that is objective and with delivered with care, and how it can be really important when we talk about our health with our close family members and partners, and being in tune or have a level of attunement with one another to stay on top of those kind of more challenging health things that can come up. And so those are all little ways where action shows up. But sometimes people come into a coaching session and want to know, well, I want to make a shift in my life. Like I want to make a bigger shift, whether that's a change of job, a change of location, a change of how I'm going about my business in the world, those sorts of things. And so as a coach, feedback is going to be woven in throughout that conversation over the course of many conversations, right? To get to a point of where there is a clear path, right? Because there's so much to explore to get to a space of actually taking action. And I know our first two sections of our journal do that so that as the journaler yourself now, you can find moments where you're using feedback to take action, maybe a little bit more quickly or a little bit more intentionally, but with purpose and kind of this readiness. Like you are ready to take action. So what does that look like then? So yeah, L Shawn, do you have any other thoughts on action and feedback?
Yeah, I like that you brought that up. I also thought about that as well, and my thoughts turned to the last part of the prompt where the how question, how can staying open and curious help you evolve into a more aligned, vibrant version of yourself? And I think in this case, feedback can lead to clarity. I want to say that it can lead to clarity. It can sometimes lead to confusion, but it can lead to clarity. And when we have clarity, it can be easier for us to take action. I personally require clarity before I can take action. I was like, maybe a little bit too cautious when it comes to taking action, because again, that perfectionism and that people pleasing part of myself can muddy the waters a little. And so I seek clarity before I act. And clarity for me shows up in alignment. And another part of this prompt, let your heart lead the reflection. And that part, that heart leading, that speaks to me of inspired action. So it's different from just taking action because you need to take action for action's sake, because we're in the action section, so therefore we must take action. But I think it's really important that it's inspired action. And I think when we align with our purpose and we align with our values, action, in my experience, becomes a natural next step. And like you were saying, Eryn, a client comes in and wants to make meaningful shifts or bigger shifts in their life. When we align with our purpose and we align with our heart's desire, most of us naturally go towards action, goes towards writing that first chapter, or goes towards having that conversation, or it goes towards taking that vacation, those things that we kind of naturally lean into because we're aligned and because we have clarity and I think feedback is part of that. It's part of that clearing the way for us to take action. And that's what's coming up for me. Anything you want to add to that, Eryn?
No, I wrote down, I love how you articulated the purpose and values will kind of be the anchors for leading to action. And I like that a lot. And it's, just going back in when we get feedback, right? We get feedback on certain skills or professional techniques or things like that that we need to have. It's pretty black and white and pretty clear. Now, the teaching of how to actually fix it, that's a bigger challenge, right? Or a bigger issue. But then the feedback sometimes that we get at that deeper level of our own humanness regarding our purpose and values, it feels different and can take a while to sink in sometimes, it seems like. And I think for me, it's been kind of one of those things. It's been kind of like I mentioned early on in the podcast, is the trail of feedback. Oh, I'm getting, oh, okay. I need to really listen. I need to really listen this time because I missed it the last 40 years or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that's really standing out to me as well. And then just action in this prompt, taking the time to sit and journal with your heart leading this reflection and seeing if there's anything that really starts to show where you may want to make a shift or take some action on. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. That almost sounds like a call to action.
It does indeed. Would you say that that's like your call to action?
Sure. Or, yes.
Yeah. Do you want to repeat it just so it's more
just like this, oh my goodness. So, for my call to action, really consider where your heart is taking you and seek out the feedback, even if it's challenging feedback to hear or receive, seek that out to then inform your next step in your action.
My call to action would be to definitely, after doing the reflection, I would add to this, because one of the things that did come up for us was the idea and the question as to where action fits in here. And I would encourage you to take a moment and sit with where you're seeing any shifts or any desire to move. Action, motion, those things are related. And it does not mean that you have to have a sense of motion or a sense of movement or a sense of doing something different. My question to you is, and my call to action is, take a moment to listen to your body and listen to what your heart is telling you, and if action is part of that. Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm L Shawn with Michelle's Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.